Welcome back, everyone. We're here for another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. I love this program. Here's why I love this program, because I get to time travel with one of my favorite people in the world. Today, Jennifer Rains is joining us all the way from Sydney, Australia, tomorrow, which I know I say that every single time we get together, and I just can't wrap my 6-year-old brain around it. It's kind of like the same concept of I don't understand how it is that an aircraft carrier can float either.
Yes.
And I just accept that I'll never figure it out and we move on in the world. So, welcome back, Jennifer. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks very much, Diana. It's great to be here.
So, Jennifer writes con contemporary romance set mainly but not exclusively in Australia. She loves the happily ever after ending. She loves wonderful characters with tremendously diverse personalities who meet each other under interesting circumstances. And she does it all with such tremendous creative ability. I'm just thrilled to have you back on the program.
Thanks.
Tell me, because it's been a while since we got together, and today you're going to be reading um Quinn by Design, which is book 2 in your Choosing Family series. And it's been a little while since I had you on the program when we did book 1. So can you just give us a kind of a refresher on the main characters in this series
Yep.
and kind of what the series is going after?
So the idea of choosing family is that often you gather people around you who are people who care and love you and support you, and they might not be your family, and you might end up being closer to them, particularly if you've lost parents, been in dysfunctional families, various things, but you recreate community yourself because that's what you want to do. So that's the sort of overall theme of these different people. But it starts with, in fact, two sets of identical twins. So in book 1, Masquerade, one of the female twins and one of the male twins were the main characters who got together. But we were also introduced to their siblings, so that we had that starting up. And this is the brother. So this is the second male identical twin. And we learned in book 1 that he was a woodworker. He likes working with wood and sustainable materials and recycles wood. And that came from, in part, a man I know. So I actually started with a table when I was creating this character, a table made of hewn pine, which is this golden pine. Very little of it left. This man had the wood because his father had picked up wood. So I think this man was in his 60s. His father had collected the wood decades and decades before, who was also a woodworker, and he'd stored it in his workshop for years and years. And this man
So it's
agreed.
now become antique wood.
Almost.
Yeah,
You'd have to
yeah.
say probably the wood is well over, yes, it's definitely antique wood, hewn pine, and it's this lovely golden colour. And this man agreed to make us a table. And the table is a piece of wood that is bark to bark, which means you see the ripple of the wood on either side because a
Oh,
slab was
neat.
cut through. It's
Yeah.
it's just stunning, and it's a long table that it's nice for people to gather around. And I thought this book needs to include this table, and
What a
so
great idea.
that was my central piece. And then I thought, I've got two characters who are sort of opposites attract. She's the heir to an antiques business. And so I liked the idea of, could people who adored antiques like people or enjoy the work of people who are relentlessly modern? And so that was part of it. But
That's a wonderful
yes,
it's a wonderful element to describe juxtaposition in people's lives. I mean,
yes,
what a great way to translate that through woodworking and through furniture and through, I just think it's a wonderful idea.
I really sort of liked the idea, and I thought it was a little bit different. And they're thrown together because her grandfather, who's her only relative, acted as a bit of a patron for this young man, but kept it quiet. And he's just died. And she's now just discovered that this man is sitting in one of her grandfather's businesses, and she feels he must have ripped her grandfather off. So she's not too happy about it, but she's grieving. And so we also move through grief. They're both experiencing some grief, and work our way through
So
that.
there's a lot for people to really grab onto in these stories and identify with, which is part of why I love your writing so much, is because it's not otherworldly writing. This is definitely identifiable for everybody walking on the planet. I'm so excited to hear from this new book. This is so much fun. Before we start the reading, though, I want to make sure that we remind our audience that there is a listener advisory for mature situations in this book. So if you have little ears listening in, you might want to preview this program before you share it with little ones. So when you are ready, please, Jennifer Rains, read Quinn by Design.
Quinn by Design, Chapter 1. A visitor was rare enough to summon NIALL QUINN to his front porch. "Don't worry about the squeak," he called to the huddled figure inspecting the hinge on his lopsided gate. He was close enough to recognise his landlady's elegant calves and ankles. "It lets me know I've got a visitor." Noticing she had shapely legs might be excused as artistic interest, but it was a distraction he wasn't ready for. She spun toward his voice, her coat floating on the breeze, before settling around her too thin figure. NIALL stepped out of the shadows. "I'm Lucy McTAVISH." She crossed the yard and stretched out her hand. "I know." Instead of the formal handshake she offered, NIALL gripped her hand to draw her up the 2 wide wooden steps to his porch. Without makeup, Lucy's pallor was hauntingly evident and matched the sadness in her almond-shaped hazel eyes. She smelled of roses, with a hint of vanilla, transporting him back to carefree afternoons in his mother's cottage garden at lilac time. "How do you know?" She withdrew her hand, pointedly reclaiming her own space. "I saw you at your granddad's funeral." NIALL had stood at the back of the church, not a close friend. His time with Cam had been too short to claim that honour. But he'd missed the old man's advice and encouragement. Mutual respect and a passion for fine craftsmanship had forged a special bond. Lucy's courage at the funeral had earned his respect, while her vulnerability roused protective instincts he'd tucked away for the sake of his sanity after his bust-up with his ex-fiancé, Sinead. "I'm glad you've dropped by." NIALL gentled her as he would a lost child. "Please, come in." He gestured for her to precede him through the front door. He'd been considering how to introduce himself since the funeral. Texting was out because he didn't have a number. Using social media seemed wrong for the words he had to say. Her arrival on a Sunday, in unrelieved black, less than 10 days after the funeral, gave the encounter an ominous urgency. "I didn't see you." "You were too caught in your grief to see me." She'd been too caught in a grief to see anyone. Her eyes had shimmered with tears, her fragility brittle enough to shatter with a blow. She'd held herself ramrod straight. Her self-discipline awed him, and her anguish had compounded his own, reopening the hole left by his Da's death. Already partway down the hall, she pivoted, met his gaze, then focused on a spot over his shoulder. "I'm sorry for my rudeness." "Wisht, lassie. There's no need for an apology. I lost my da a few years ago. Didn't care who saw me cry like a baby." The colour drained from her cheeks, leaving them chalk white and drawing NIALL's attention to her dark auburn hair. The tight bundle at her nape punished rather than tamed her thick tresses. I learned wished from Grandpa. She sounded bereft, and he'd been raised to tend any animal in pain. I picked it up working in Ireland. Cam used it when he was about to impart some piece of wisdom to my idiot self. Neil smiled encouragement and waved towards the doorway at the end of the short hall. I was in the kitchen. The loss is a constant, he said. Learning to live with it is the challenge. Before cursing his cack-handedness. For feck's sake. Cam had said he was Lucy's only immediate family. She probably knew more about loss than Neil hoped he ever would. He couldn't recall who'd used the expression, but the words fitted her. She knew her way around in the dark. Grief could be endlessly dark. Neat black serviceable pumps continued up the narrow hall and into his neat serviceable kitchen, their rat-tat-tat shutting a door on his words of condolence. You call him Cam. She stood stiffly beside the 3 by 2 metre bark-to-bark hewn pine table he'd finished in the early hours this morning, then muscled into the kitchen so he could live with it a few days. He asked me to. Said Cameron McTAVISH made him feel ancient. Neil stepped around her, his arm brushing against hers in the space made smaller by the table. She shivered. Not fear. Maybe cold. Grief could also make you cold from the inside out. I have some questions for you, Mr. Quinn. She straightened her shoulders, tilting her chin to signal her return to business. Please sit down, Miss McTAVISH, he replied with equal formality. Then, without waiting to see what she did, he continued to the kitchen bench. I was making tea. Share a cup? He spoke over his shoulder. Tea was his mother's cure for every ill. I won't be here long. Politeness jostled with annoyance in her answer. Tea doesn't take long. Neil kept his back turned. Thank you, she said. He heard a chair being placed on the floor and learned Lucy McTAVISH didn't pull chairs across stone tiles. Instead, she lifted them before setting them in the correct position. After filling the kettle, Neil opened the fridge and eyed ingredients before making his choice. A seeded sourdough loaf, a mature cheddar, tomatoes and lettuce. He added pickles. Milk? Milk, no sugar, please. He assembled sandwiches, poured the boiling water into a large teapot and let it sit. The overlong silence told Neil she was struggling to find the words she wanted. He slowed his movements to give her time to marshal her arguments. While he brought the kettle back to the boil, he drained the water from the pot into 2 waiting cups. Covering the full teapot with a cosy, he emptied the now warm cups and carried everything to the table, including 2 plates and the jar of pickles. I'll let you fix your own. I didn't ask for that. She made a face at the oversized sandwich he'd set in front of her. It's lunchtime. Neil took the chair opposite her. Her guilty glance at her watch told him she'd lost touch of time, while her unfashionably baggy clothes told him eating was a faint memory. Loss of appetite was another byproduct of heartache. He'd been there too. I hate to eat alone, he said. I thought you lived alone. She cut 1/2 of her sandwich in half and added pickles. Eating his food was another nod to politeness. Referring to his living arrangements was her opening salvo in hostilities. What else did your granda tell you? Neil waited for her to swallow her first mouthful, then took a bite of his own. Months ago, Grandpa talked about meeting a furniture restorer at an antiques auction. I've done the odd bit of restoration. Neil was pretty positive Cam had offered those pieces as a sop to Neil's dignity. While the profit from their sale had covered the rent, over time Neil worked out Cam had become his patron rather than his landlord. And wasn't that a fecking indictment? At 34, he needed an old man's patronage because his passion for making bespoke furniture had yet to deliver a decent living. 3 pieces. She placed her left hand on his table, as if drawing strength from the age and beauty of the timber. 3 pieces of furniture were delivered to McTAVISH's Antiques 3 months ago. Cam said they earned a good profit. Neil wrapped both hands around his blue Italian Spode cup, watching as she raised the Flora Danica Royal Copenhagen to her mouth, a distraction while she framed her answer. Like most of his cups, the matching saucers were lost in the midst of time. They did. Her chin jut signalled a full stop on McTAVISH profits. Cam said he told you about our arrangement. Neil's doubts were growing. Furniture restorer was a half-assed description of him. He told me he offered you accommodation in return for restoring furniture. 3 pieces of furniture over 8 months gives you a higher hourly rate than a top-class hooker. The insult rolled off her tongue, the barb sinking deeper than she could have known. Unaware, she popped the last morsel of the second quarter of sandwich into her luscious bow-shaped mouth. Cam was an astute businessman. After a tussle, which had included consultation with his lawyer brother, Neil was at peace with his conscience. He controlled how much restoration he wanted. From his sick bed, she licked a pickle off her thumb, her tongue sexily practical as it brushed along her knuckle to collect the smear of sauce. The lapse in table manners gave a hint of the warm-hearted woman Cam had talked about. Today's disciplined facade was a slap at Neil. While I delivered the last piece 5 months ago, Cam spent a lot of happy hours here until these last 2 months. And when Neil had visited Cam's hospital in the home, Cam had demanded updates on progress with Neil's upcoming exhibition. Cam's favourite design was for the Huon table his granddaughter was currently stroking. Sorrow pressed on Neil's chest. A few months ago, Cam would have been in the workshop with him on a Sunday afternoon, sharing his large pot of tea and a sandwich. He didn't invite me to be his tenant, just for my restoration. Why did he invite you? She focused her irritation on sawing the second half sandwich into 2 quarters. She was eating, which he counted as a win. Are you asking as Cam's granddaughter or as my new landlord? Neil got that anger was better than fear or sadness for dealing with despair. Rage gave her a purpose, a reason to get up every day. Directing it at him was disrespecting her granddad's right to make his own decisions. You knew he was dying. Her voice deepened into loathing, as if Neil had killed Cam. Not soon enough, he said. Neil's obsession with work had fed his ignorance, although Cam had deliberately downplayed the cancer stealing his life. He was a kindred spirit who talked about wood and design and what made a piece of furniture prized. More tea? He played host, tilting the enormous teapot in her direction. Thank you. She was either innately polite or trained to it. Another interesting discovery. He guessed politeness was the only constraint on the passion boiling below her surface. He told me his doctor wanted him to slow down. Neil topped off his own cup. Cam said he'd earned the right to indulge in himself. By letting you stay in a large inner Sydney property, rent-free. You don't know the history to our agreement, Neil concluded, a sense of foreboding kneecapping him. Or she knew a bit, and in her distress had extrapolated it from being a mutually beneficial arrangement to something less savoury. Why hadn't Cam kept his promise? I found a copy this morning. Her left hand returned to the table, her thumb curving around the edge, brushing the newly shellacked wood. Her unconscious fascination nourished the artist in him and vindicated his decision to make the table the centrepiece of his upcoming exhibition. 3 pieces of furniture restored in exchange for 12 months free rent looks like fraud to me. Neil's cup landed on the table with a thump, causing his guest to wince. I've made repairs. I've paid utilities and insurance for the full 12 months. With an enterprise like mine, a lease less than 12 months isn't viable. This is prime commercially valuable space. She looked exhausted, as if survival was taking every ounce of energy she had. You took advantage of him. My mum would tan my hide if I took advantage of anyone, much less a man old enough to be my grandar. Neil tried to diffuse the situation, near impossible when he was operating with minimal facts. Sharing a sense of loss handicapped him further. An agreement signed in the last few days of his life. Miss McTAVISH, Lucy, I can see finding out about our arrangement is a shock to you. I sympathise with your loss. Neil wrapped his hands around his cup to prevent himself reaching for her. If he offered a friendly hug in a current mood, she'd charge him with harassment as well as fraud. Cam was in full possession of his faculties when we signed our updated agreement. It's theft! Having made the cruel accusation, she deflated like a lung starved of oxygen. It's a legal contract, he stated. There were witnesses. Cam's lawyer can answer any questions, as can his accountant. But we're not talking about the 8 months you've been here and the 4 in your so-called updated agreement. We're talking about another year. Her voice deepened, a musical contralto vibrating with disbelief. We're talking about him changing his will in the last days of his life. He's bequeathed you a second 12-month occupancy of this property, rent-free. You're wrong. Neil's instinctive protest propelled him to his feet. Neil had believed Cam's assurances Lucy was comfortable with his tenancy. Or maybe he'd wanted to believe. You said it yourself. Anything less than 12 months isn't viable. So you tricked him in the last days of his life. Her voice wobbled. Lucy, I'm sorry Cam didn't tell you about our arrangement. Neil swung to face her, disquiet roiling his gut. I won't deny I've thought of staying here longer, on commercial terms. He sounded unconvincing to his own ears. I promise you, we never talked about his will. She cocked her head to one side, considering him and pronouncing him untruthful. Her sceptical gaze dragged a clarification from Neil. Okay, he told me he wanted to update our agreement to bring it in line with his will. Update the original 12 months to be clear I had 4 left. Cam said you'd be inheriting everything, maybe a few bequests here and there. So you did discuss his will. Making a statement is not a discussion. Are you sure you haven't mixed up 2 things? Feck, that had to be the answer. She was muddled by grief. I hope to hell she's muddled by grief. I rang my lawyer when I found the agreement. She looked at her left hand now, fingers spread, palm flat on the golden-hued pine. She treated his table with the reverence many women reserve for precious jewels, while accusing him of a scam. Henry told me the will gave you more, so I need to know. Who are you, and what hold did you have over Grandpa? No hold. Why the hell had Cam kept secrets about their relationship, about their contract? He sure as hell should have given Neil a hint of what he planned. We were friends. You mean you pretended to be friends with a sick old man? The daft woman kept one hand on his table during their entire conversation, seemingly blind to the subtle connection to him. He wasn't sick when I met him, Neil insisted. The last time I saw him, he was alert and engaged. His last conversation with Cam had been about Cam's fear of leaving his granddaughter alone, not the will. And Cam had apologised. Praise the saints. Was this what Cam was apologising for? A debt Neil could never repay? Neil's mouth dried. You must have misunderstood. She'd finished the sandwich. Lucy stared at her empty plate. He sounded sincerely baffled about the will, baffled with an edge of panic. He was charming. Conman was supposed to be charming. The crooked grin, the laugh lines fanning out from the corners of his soulful grey eyes, the russet-coloured lock of hair hanging over his forehead. Even his movements were charming. manly and charming, economical and practical, heroic even, with broad shoulders and the solid strength of someone who worked with his body, while his clean sandalwood scent with its tart hint of citrus reassured. Lucy refused to be pacified. The constant parade of men through a mother's life and bedroom during Lucy's entire first decade had taught her the futility of relying on men. Still, she'd finished the sandwich, the largest meal she'd eaten in forever. Wished. You're hiding something.
That's where you're gonna leave me?
Yes, I had a bit more, but I think I might be longer than your time.
That's unfair.
I did have more because I was doing 20 and I think I should
Thank
have
you
done less.
so much for the reading. I really, really appreciate that. As I always am, I'm enamored with your work. I love your writing style. It's just so fantastic.
Thank
Let
you.
me ask you this before I let you go. This is the second in a trilogy. So,
No, it's more than a trilogy.
oh,
So it
it's
starts with the identical twins and it branches out to friends.
so how many books are you envisioning in this series?
I've envisaged 5. There's actually a 6th, but it's not working in my head
Wow.
yet. Well, it's not
Wow.
working in my head yet. So I'm stopping at 5 and doing
Okay.
something else. And perhaps at some other stage, I might come back.
That's well, you'd be welcome back anytime you like. So my question though is this, because I've been asking authors this a lot lately because I have been working on a 4-book series,
Mhm,
which in the beginning was not supposed to be a series, but
mhm.
the duck had other plans. So um my question is, how do you know what to give away and what not to give away when building a series? Is that an instinctual thing, or do you have to plan those parts?
I think it has to be planned and maybe not planned because I'm not a total plotter in advance,
Mm-hmm.
although I do think about things. My original concept for this was 3. And so that was why the 2 sets of identical twins, I thought, right, that sorts me, one together,
Right,
and then the other sibling, 2 siblings get one each.
right.
And then I decided to include a friend of one of the characters. And that had been a book that was just turning over in my head for a long time. I had a prologue. It's a bit different in style. So all of my books can be read as standalones. So you
Okay.
can do that. But there's usually enough time, I've discovered, between you finished it, your publishers accepted it, it takes the time to go to print, and another book comes for you to realize, oh dear, I should have planted a seed there.
So it is a little bit like raising children. You have them at intervals, and then you try to fix the mistakes you made with the second one. I mean, with the first one, when you're raising the second and the third, and
To some extent, yes. And
yeah.
but I also go back and study closely the um, conversations. So, for example, NIALL QUINN
Mm-hmm.
talked to his brother on a few occasions in book 1. So I had the cadence of his sort of dialogue and what his passions were about, and a little bit about what his demons were that we discovered from then. So I kept that as a guide and used that in starting the book that was just about him.
So you
So
had a little bit of a roadmap to help you along the
yes,
way.
because
Yeah.
the characters appear in the previous books, part of, well, that's very definitely where you take some of your characterization from, because you've portrayed them, even if it's a cameo appearance in a different
Right.
book. You've
Right.
already
You
planted ideas in the reader's head about what they're like.
sure.
So, in fact, the third book was quite tricky The third book was possibly the trickiest so far to some extent, because it was the final twin, the female, and she'd appeared in both book 1 and book 2.
So
And
you
I had
kind of had to
readers,
give her ending.
I had readers already saying, okay,
Yeah,
I'm waiting for Anna.
yeah.
No
Oh,
pressure here.
Yeah, no pressure, but when, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm super excited for you. I'm so glad to see that your writing career is flourishing so delightfully well. I look forward to hearing you come back on the program. I know you have another book in this series that you're going to come back shortly and read for us. And then you have others. So I highly recommend that everybody go listen to the previous episodes that Jennifer has done with us on the program and look for her books. All the information is in the show notes. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time today and reading for us.
Thanks, Diana, for giving me the opportunity. It's terrific.
You are always welcome.